The whispers cut through the church like sharp knives. "Look at her dress. It's so plain. Did she make that herself? I heard she couldn't even afford a proper wedding planner. The Andersons must be mortified. Their son is marrying someone like her." Maya stood at the back of the church, her hands trembling as she clutched her small bouquet of wildflowers that she had gathered herself that morning. The beautiful white dress she had saved for months to buy suddenly felt inadequate, the simple veil too plain. She watched as Daniel's mother whispered something to his father, both of them glancing back at her with barely concealed disappointment. The wedding march began to play, but instead of walking toward her, Daniel's father approached her with a grim expression. "I need to speak with you outside," he said quietly, steering her by the elbow away from the curious eyes of the guests. Outside the church, in the small garden where she had dreamed of taking her wedding photos, Mr. Anderson released her arm and stepped back as if he couldn't bear to touch her. "Maya, this isn't going to work," he said firmly. "Our family has a reputation to maintain. Daniel needs someone who can be a proper partner in the social circles we operate in. You're a sweet girl, but you're just too different from us." His eyes swept over her dress, her homemade bouquet, her borrowed shoes. "Too poor. Daniel has agreed this is for the best. He's not coming out to explain because he thought it would be kinder this way." Maya felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The man she loved, the man who had promised to stand by her side forever, had abandoned her at the altar because she wasn't rich enough. Because despite working 2 jobs to save for this day, despite pouring her heart into every detail she could afford, it wasn't enough. She wasn't enough. As tears streamed down her face, the church doors burst open. An older man in an expensive suit walked purposefully toward them, his face a mask of controlled anger. "Richard Anderson," the man called out, his voice echoing in the garden. "What do you think you're doing to my daughter?" 6 months earlier, Maya Evans pushed open the door to the small coffee shop where she worked, the bell jingling cheerfully above her head. It was 5:30 a.m., and the streets of Boston were still quiet, the sky just beginning to lighten with the promise of dawn. "Morning, Dave," she called to the baker who was already pulling fresh pastries from the oven. "Morning, Maya. You're early again," Dave replied with a smile. "Got to save up," she said, tying her apron around her waist. "Weddings in 6 months." Dave chuckled. Never seen anyone so excited to work extra hours. Maya smiled as she prepared the coffee machines for the morning rush. At 26, she had spent most of her life working hard for everything she had. Orphaned at 12 when her parents died in a car accident, she had bounced between foster homes until she aged out of the system. There had never been enough money for college, so she worked her way up from entry-level jobs, taking night classes when she could afford them. Now she worked at the coffee shop in the mornings, and as an administrative assistant at a law firm in the afternoons. Every dollar she earned was carefully budgeted rent for her tiny apartment, groceries, utilities, and whatever was left went into her wedding fund. The morning passed in a blur of customers and coffee orders. Around 10, the door opened, and Maya looked up to see a tall, distinguished man in his 60s enter. He wore an expensive suit that contrasted with the casual atmosphere of the shop, and his silver hair was perfectly styled. Despite his obvious wealth, there was a kindness in his eyes that made Maya smile as she greeted him. "Good morning. What can I get for you today?" The man studied the menu board for a moment. "I'll have a black coffee, please, and one of those blueberry muffins." "Coming right up," Maya said, ringing up his order. As she worked, she noticed him watching her with an odd expression, almost as if he were trying to place her face. "Do you always work this early?" he asked as she handed him his coffee. "Most days. I have another job in the afternoons," she explained. "2 jobs? That's quite a workload." Maya shrugged. Getting married soon. Every little bit helps." The man smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Congratulations! When's the big day?" "September 15th, Maya replied, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "Just about 6 months away now." "Well, I wish you all the happiness in the world," he said sincerely, leaving a $20 bill in the tip jar before she could protest. He returned the next day, and the day after that. Soon, he became a regular customer, always arriving around 10, always ordering the same black coffee and blueberry muffin. They fell into an easy rhythm of conversation. Maya learned that his name was Edward Winters, that he owned a technology company, and that he lived alone in a penthouse apartment downtown. Edward, in turn, learned about Maya's life, her parents' death, her struggles through the foster system, her determination to make something of herself despite the obstacles. He never pitied her, which she appreciated. Instead, he seemed to genuinely admire her resilience. "You remind me of someone," he told her one morning, about a month after they'd first met. "Someone I lost a long time ago." Maya didn't press for details. There was a sadness in his eyes that suggested the wound was still raw, even after what must have been many years. Daniel Anderson walked into Maya's life 2 years ago, when she was working as a waitress at an upscale restaurant where he was dining with business associates. He'd left his card with her number written on the back, and against her better judgment, she had called him. He was everything she wasn't: privileged, well-educated, from a wealthy family with deep roots in Boston society. But he had been charming and kind, seeming genuinely interested in her life and her dreams. When he proposed after a year of dating, Maya had been over the moon. "He sounds wonderful," Edward commented one morning when Maya mentioned her fiancé. "When do I get to meet this paragon?" Maya laughed. "He's usually at work when you come in. He's a financial analyst at Anderson Smith." She didn't mention that Daniel's father was the Anderson in the company name. Edward raised an eyebrow. "Impressive firm. They handle a lot of high-profile clients." "Daniel works really hard," Maya said defensively, mistaking Edward's comment for criticism. "He's going to make partner someday." Edward held up his hands in surrender. "I'm sure he will. Any man lucky enough to have you in his corner is bound for success." Maya blushed at the compliment. In the months since Edward had become a regular at the coffee shop, she had come to see him as a sort of father figure. He gave her advice when she asked for it, listened when she needed to vent, and always treated her with a respect that made her feel valued. "Actually," she said, glancing at the clock, "he's meeting me for lunch today. My shift ends in 20 minutes. Edward checked his watch. "As much as I'd like to, I have a meeting I can't miss. Perhaps another time." Maya nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. For some reason, she really wanted Edward to meet Daniel, as if his approval would somehow validate her choice. "But I do have something for you," Edward continued, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. Maya took the envelope hesitantly. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." Edward interrupted gently. "Go ahead, open it." Inside the envelope was a check for $5,000, made out to Maya Evans. "I can't accept this," she gasped, trying to hand it back. "It's too much." Edward closed her fingers around the check. "You can and you will. Consider it an investment in your future happiness." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, impulsively giving him a quick hug. "This will help so much with the wedding." Edward patted her back awkwardly. "That's what it's for. Now, I really must go. Give my regards to your fiancé." As the weeks passed, Maya threw herself into wedding planning with renewed enthusiasm. The unexpected gift from Edward allowed her to book a small church for the ceremony and a modest reception hall. She found a simple but beautiful wedding dress at a boutique sale, spent hours crafting handmade centerpieces, and carefully selected wildflowers that would be in season for her bouquet. Daniel seemed less involved in the planning process. At first, Maya attributed this to his heavy workload, but as the wedding drew closer, she couldn't ignore the distance growing between them. He began to criticize her choices, suggesting venues they couldn't afford and designers whose prices made her head spin. "My parents expect a certain standard," he explained when she protested that they couldn't spend more than they had. "They're inviting a lot of important business contacts." "I thought we agreed on a small wedding," Maya reminded him. "Just close friends and family." Daniel sighed. "My father says this is an opportunity to strengthen business relationships. He's offering to contribute, but he has certain expectations." Maya felt a knot form in her stomach. She had met Daniel's parents only a handful of times, and each encounter had left her feeling inadequate. Mrs. Anderson, with her perfect hair and designer clothes, had barely concealed her disappointment when Daniel introduced Maya. Mr. Anderson had been polite but distant, his questions about her background making it clear he found her lacking. "Maybe we should postpone," she suggested hesitantly. "Save up a bit more. Do it properly." "No," Daniel said quickly. "My parents have already sent out invitations. Everything's set for September 15th. Maya nodded, pushing down her unease. She loved Daniel, and he loved her. That was what mattered, not the wedding or his parents' approval. Edward noticed the change in Maya's demeanor immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked one morning when she handed him his coffee without her usual smile. Maya hesitated, then found herself pouring out her concerns: Daniel's sudden insistence on an elaborate wedding, his parents' clear disapproval, her own fears that she wasn't good enough for the world he came from. Edward listened quietly, his expression growing more troubled with each word. When she finished, he asked carefully, "Do you love him, Maya?" "Yes," she answered, without hesitation. "And does he love you? The real you, not some version he's trying to mold to fit his parents' expectations?" Maya wanted to say yes, but the question gave her pause. Did Daniel love her for who she was, or for who he thought she could become? "I think he does," she said finally. "He's just caught between me and his family right now." Edward nodded, though he didn't look convinced. Marriage is hard enough without starting with that kind of conflict. Just make sure you're marrying a man who will stand by your side, not behind his parents. Maya smiled weakly. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." A shadow passed over Edward's face. "I am," he admitted. "I lost the love of my life because I cared too much about what my family thought. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late." Before Maya could ask more, the door opened and Daniel walked in. He was handsome in his tailored suit, his blonde hair perfectly styled, looking every inch the successful young professional. "Daniel!" Maya exclaimed, surprised to see him at the coffee shop. "What are you doing here?" "Thought I'd surprise you," he said, leaning across the counter to give her a quick kiss. His eyes darted to Edward, who was watching them with interest. "Who's your friend?" "This is Edward Winters," Maya introduced them. "He's a regular customer. Edward, this is my fiancé, Daniel Anderson." Edward extended his hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Daniel. Maya speaks very highly of you." Daniel shook his hand briefly. "Nice to meet you too." He turned back to Maya. "I can't stay long. Just wanted to tell you that Mom's arranged a final fitting for your dress this weekend." Maya frowned. "What dress? I already have my wedding dress." Daniel had the grace to look embarrassed. Mom thought, "Well, she thought you might like something more traditional. She's ordered a dress from a designer she knows." "Without asking me?" Maya felt her cheeks flush with anger and humiliation. "It's a gift, Maya," Daniel said, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. "A very expensive gift. The least you could do is try it on." Edward cleared his throat. "If you'll excuse me, I should be going." He nodded to Maya. "Thank you for the coffee." As he walked away, Maya heard him mutter something that sounded like, That poor girl deserves better. The dress Mrs. Anderson had chosen was everything Maya's dress was note-elaborate, with layers of expensive lace, thousands of tiny beads, and a train that stretched for yards. It was also at least a size too small, a fact the seamstress pointed out with a disapproving click of her tongue. "We can let it out a bit, Mrs. Anderson said, eyeing Maya's figure critically. "But you really should try to lose a few pounds before the wedding, dear. The photographer will be from Vogue, and those cameras add weight." Maya bit her lip to keep from crying. "I already have a dress, Mrs. Anderson. One that fits me perfectly." "Call me Victoria, please." The older woman waved a dismissive hand. "And I'm sure your dress is nice, but this is a statement piece. It shows that you're entering a different world now. A world where I don't belong," Maya thought but didn't say. Instead, she endured 3 hours of being pinned and measured and criticized, all while Daniel stood by saying nothing to defend her. When they finally left the boutique, Maya was nearly in tears. "Why didn't you tell her I already have a dress?" she demanded once they were alone. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he made when he was uncomfortable. "It means a lot to her to do this for you, for us. She's trying to welcome you into the family in her own way." "By making me feel like everything I've chosen isn't good enough?" Maya asked. "That's not fair," Daniel protested. "My parents are paying for most of the wedding now. They have a right to some input." "Input, yes. Taking over completely? No." Maya took a deep breath. "Daniel, I love you, but I'm starting to feel like I'm marrying your whole family, not just you." Daniel's expression softened. He pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. "I know they can be overwhelming, but they'll calm down after the wedding, I promise. Just try to go along with things for now." "For me?" Maya sighed, letting herself melt into his embrace. "For you," she agreed reluctantly. "But I draw the line at the flowers. I'm using wildflowers like we planned." Daniel kissed the top of her head. "Whatever makes you happy." The next time Maya saw Edward, she was on her lunch break, sitting on a bench in the small park near the coffee shop. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice him approach until he spoke. "May I join you?" he asked. Maya looked up, surprised. "Edward, of course." He sat beside her, his expensive suit incongruous in the casual park setting. For a few minutes they sat in companionable silence, watching children play on the swings. "I've been thinking about you," Edward said finally. "After meeting your fiancé, I've been concerned." Maya stiffened. "Daniel's a good man." "I'm sure he is," Edward agreed. "But good men sometimes make poor choices when they're caught between the woman they love and the family they're trying to please." "You don't know him," Maya said defensively. "No," Edward conceded, "but I know his type. I was his type once, many years ago." He turned to face her directly. "Maya, I don't want to overstep, but I care about you. I see in you the same strength and determination I saw in someone I loved very much. I don't want to see you diminished by people who can't appreciate how extraordinary you are." Maya felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "Everything's changing so fast. The wedding, the expectations. Sometimes I hardly recognize my own life anymore." Edward reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "If you ever need anything, advice, a friendly ear, or even just a place to escape for a while, call me, day or night." Maya took the card, running her thumb over the embossed lettering. "Edward Winters, CEO, Winters Tech Innovations." "You never told me you were a CEO," she said, momentarily distracted from her worries. Edward shrugged. "It never seemed relevant to our conversations." Maya slipped the card into her pocket. "Thank you. For caring, I mean." Edward's smile was tinged with sadness. "You make it easy to care, Maya. Now, I believe your lunch break is almost over. Shall we walk back together?" As the wedding date approached, Maya felt increasingly like a spectator at her own wedding. Daniel's mother had taken over most of the planning, replacing Maya's carefully chosen details with more expensive alternatives. The small church was swapped for a grand cathedral, the modest reception hall for a ballroom at a five-star hotel. The guest list grew from 50 close friends and family to over 200 people, most of whom Maya had never met. The only thing she had managed to salvage was her bouquet of wildflowers, and that only because she had insisted on gathering them herself on the morning of the wedding. Edward had been a steady source of support through it all. He listened to her venting without judgment, offered advice when asked, and sometimes just provided a quiet companionship that required no words. Maya found herself looking forward to his daily visits to the coffee shop, which had become a small oasis of normalcy in her increasingly chaotic life. "I have something to tell you," she said one morning, about 2 weeks before the wedding. "I've decided to quit this job after the honeymoon. Daniel thinks it would be better if I focused on being a proper wife." Edward's eyebrows shot up. "And what do you think?" Maya looked down at her hands. I'm scared of losing myself. But Daniel says his mother will introduce me to the right people, teach me how to fit into their world." "And is that what you want? To fit into their world?" Edward's voice was carefully neutral. "I want to be with Daniel," Maya said, avoiding the question. "I love him." Edward was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Do you remember what I told you about losing someone I loved?" Maya nodded. "What I didn't tell you," Edward continued, his voice soft with old pain, "is that she was pregnant when I let her go. I had a child I never met, a family I threw away because I was too weak to stand up for what really mattered." Maya stared at him, stunned by the confession. "Edward, I'm so sorry." He waved away her sympathy. "It was a long time ago, but I've spent my life regretting that decision, searching for the family I lost." His eyes met hers, intense and urgent. "Don't let anyone make you smaller, Maya. Not even the man you love." The bell over the door jingled, breaking the moment. Maya turned to greet the new customer, her mind still reeling from Edward's revelation. The day before the wedding, Maya received a package at her apartment. Inside was a small jewelry box and a note. "Something borrowed, something blue. May it bring you the happiness it once brought someone else, Edward." Maya opened the box to find a stunning sapphire pendant on a delicate silver chain. It was clearly an antique, the stone surrounded by tiny diamonds in an intricate setting that spoke of both craftsmanship and significant value. She touched it reverently, wondering about the woman who had worn it before her. She tried to call Edward to thank him, but the call went straight to voicemail. After leaving a message expressing her gratitude, she carefully placed the necklace in her overnight bag. She would wear it tomorrow, a beautiful reminder of the friendship that had become so important to her. That night, she could barely sleep. Her thoughts kept circling between excitement, anxiety, and a growing sense of unease she couldn't quite name. When dawn finally broke, she gathered her things and headed to the small garden near the church, where she had arranged to meet her bridesmaids' friends from her time in foster care who had been like sisters to her. Together they collected wildflowers for her bouquet, laughing and talking as they worked. For a few hours Maya forgot her worries, lost in the simple joy of being with people who knew and loved her exactly as she was. By the time they arrived at the church to get ready, Maya felt calmer. She slipped into her simple wedding dress, not the elaborate gown Mrs. Anderson had chosen, but the one she had saved for months to buy. It was elegant in its simplicity, a sheath of ivory satin with delicate lace cap sleeves and a modest train. Around her neck, she fastened Edward's sapphire pendant, the blue stone vibrant against her skin. "You look beautiful," her friend Jessie assured her, helping to arrange the simple veil in her hair. "Daniel's a lucky man," agreed her other bridesmaid Tara. Maya smiled, feeling a flutter of nervous excitement. In just an hour, she would walk down the aisle to become Mrs. Daniel Anderson. Whatever came next, they would face it together. But as the minutes ticked by, a sense of foreboding began to grow in her chest. The church filled with guests she didn't know, elegant strangers in designer clothes who looked out of place next to her small group of friends. Daniel's mother swept in wearing a gown that probably cost more than Maya's entire wedding budget, her expression tight with barely concealed disapproval as she surveyed the preparations. When it was almost time to begin, Maya watched from a small side room as the guests took their seats. She saw Daniel's father, Richard Anderson, enter at the last minute, his face grim as he spoke hurriedly to his wife. Then, instead of taking his place at the front of the church to wait for the bride, he headed toward the back, toward her. The whispers started as soon as he entered the small waiting area where Maya stood with her bridesmaids. "Look at her dress. It's so plain. Did she make that herself? I heard she couldn't even afford a proper wedding planner. The Andersons must be mortified their son is marrying someone like her." Maya stood frozen, her hands trembling as she clutched her small bouquet of wildflowers. The beautiful white dress she had saved for months to buy suddenly felt inadequate, the simple veil too plain. She watched as Daniel's mother whispered something to his father, both of them glancing back at her with barely concealed disappointment. The wedding march began to play, but instead of walking toward her, Daniel's father approached her with a grim expression. "I need to speak with you outside," he said quietly, steering her by the elbow away from the curious eyes of the guests. Her bridesmaids exchanged worried glances but stayed behind as Mr. Anderson led Maya outside. In the small garden where she had dreamed of taking her wedding photos, Mr. Anderson released her arm and stepped back, as if he couldn't bear to touch her. "Maya, this isn't going to work," he said firmly. "Our family has a reputation to maintain. Daniel needs someone who can be a proper partner in the social circles we operate in. You're a sweet girl, but you're just too different from us." His eyes swept over her dress, her homemade bouquet, her borrowed shoes. "Too poor, to be blunt. Daniel has agreed this is for the best. He's not coming out to explain because he thought it would be kinder this way." Maya felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The man she loved, the man who had promised to stand by her side forever, had abandoned her at the altar because she wasn't rich enough. Because despite working 2 jobs to save for this day, despite pouring her heart into every detail she could afford, it wasn't enough. She wasn't enough. As tears streamed down her face, the church doors burst open. An older man in an expensive suit walked purposefully toward them, his face a mask of controlled anger. "Richard Anderson," the man called out, his voice echoing in the garden. "What do you think you're doing to my daughter?" Maya stared in shock as Edward Winters strode toward them, his normally kind eyes blazing with fury. Richard Anderson turned, irritation flashing across his face. "Excuse me? This is a private conversation." "A private conversation where you're telling my daughter she's not good enough for your son?" Edward interrupted, coming to stand protectively beside Maya. "Not rich enough? Not well-connected enough? I find that ironic, considering your company's recent financial troubles." Richard blanched. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Edward's voice was dangerously soft. "The SEC investigation into Anderson Smith's accounting practices? The clients who've been quietly withdrawing their portfolios? I make it my business to know these things, Richard, just as I make it my business to protect my family." Maya found her voice at last. "Edward, what are you talking about? I'm not your daughter." Edward turned to her, his expression softening. "But you are, Maya. At least, I believe you are." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an old photograph. "This is your mother, isn't it?" Maya took the photo with trembling hands. It showed a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, with Maya's same dark hair and warm brown eyes. She was smiling, her arms around a much younger Edward Winters. "That's my mom," she whispered. "But how?" "Sophia Evans," Edward said, his voice thick with emotion. "The love of my life. I let her go because my family thought she wasn't good enough. She was pregnant when she left, but I was too proud to go after her. By the time I realized my mistake, she had disappeared. I've been searching for her for both of you ever since." Maya's mind reeled. Her mother had rarely spoken of her father, saying only that he had been young and unable to commit. She had never indicated that he was wealthy or that he had been searching for them. "When I saw you in the coffee shop," Edward continued, "you looked so much like her. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. I hired investigators, found your birth certificate. Sophia Evans named me as the father, but I never received any notification. Mom always said she wanted to make it on her own," Maya said softly. "She was so independent, so strong. Like mother, like daughter." Edward smiled sadly. "I've spent 26 years regretting the choice I made. I don't want to see you sacrifice yourself for a man who won't stand up for you the way I should have stood up for your mother." Richard Anderson had been watching this exchange with growing discomfort. "Winters," he said, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Edward Winters of Winters Tech?" Edward nodded curtly. "The same." Richard's demeanor changed instantly. "I didn't realize Maya had such connections. Perhaps we've been hasty." "Save it," Edward snapped. "Your son had his chance to be worthy of my daughter." The church doors opened again, and Daniel emerged, looking confused. "Dad? The minister says we need to start." He stopped short when he saw Maya's tear-streaked face. "Maya? What's going on?" "Your father was just telling me that the wedding is off," Maya said, finding strength in her anger. Daniel's eyes widened. "I never said." "But you didn't disagree, did you?" Maya challenged. "When your father decided I wasn't worthy of being an Anderson, you didn't stand up for me. You let him come out here to dismiss me like I was nothing." Daniel turned to his father, his face flushing with anger or shame. Maya couldn't tell which. "Dad, what did you do?" Richard straightened his tie, looking uncomfortable. "I was trying to spare you both a mistake, but I've just learned that Maya is Edward Winters' daughter. That changes things." "Of course it does," Maya said bitterly. "Suddenly I'm worthy of your precious son because my father is rich, not because I'm smart or kind or hard-working, not because I love Daniel with all my heart, but because of money." She turned to Daniel, tears flowing freely now. "And you let this happen. I kept compromising, kept trying to fit into your world, and you just stood by while I lost pieces of myself, while your mother replaced my choices with hers, while your father judged me for where I came from rather than who I am." Daniel reached for her hand. "Maya, please. I love you." Maya stepped back, out of his reach. "But you knew how they felt about me, and you never once told them it didn't matter, that you loved me anyway." Edward placed a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder. "We should go," he said softly. "There are 200 people in that church waiting for a wedding that isn't going to happen." "I'll explain," Daniel said desperately. "We can fix this." "There's nothing to fix," Maya replied, removing her engagement ring and placing it in his palm. "It was broken from the start. I just didn't want to see it." Edward drove Maya back to her apartment in his sleek black Mercedes, neither of them speaking much on the journey. When they arrived, he hesitated before turning off the engine. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Not just for today, but for all the years I missed, for not being there when you and your mother needed me." Maya looked at the elegant man beside her, trying to reconcile the idea that this was her father, the missing piece of her life's puzzle. "Why didn't she tell you? About me, I mean." Edward sighed deeply. "Your mother was proud and hurt. When I chose my family's approval over her, it broke something between us. I tried to find her later, But she had already moved away. Changed her number. By the time my investigator located her, you were both living in Chicago. I was on my way there when... He trailed off, unable to finish. When they died, Maya completed softly. The car accident. Edward nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I was too late. By the time I arrived, you had already been placed in foster care. The system wouldn't release your information to me because I had no legal proof I was your father. Your mother and I never married, and my name wasn't on your original birth certificate. So you've been looking for me all this time? Maya asked, trying to absorb the enormity of what he was telling her. For 14 years, Edward confirmed. I never gave up. When I walked into that coffee shop and saw you, it was like seeing a ghost. You look so much like her. Maya touched the sapphire pendant at her throat. This was hers, wasn't it? Edward nodded. I gave it to her when we were young and in love. It was my grandmother's. She returned it when we broke up. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in thoughts of what might have been. Then Edward spoke again, his voice tentative. I know it's too late for me to be the father you needed growing up, but if you'll let me, I'd like to be in your life now. To get to know you, to make up for lost time. Maya studied his face, the lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow, the silver hair that had once been dark like hers, the familiar shape of his jaw that she now recognized in her own reflection. She thought of how he had listened to her, supported her, cared enough to warn her about repeating his own mistakes. I'd like that, she said simply. Edward's smile was radiant. Then shall we go inside? I believe we have a lot to talk about. In the weeks that followed, Maya and Edward began the delicate process of building a relationship. There were awkward moments, misunderstandings, and occasional tension as they navigated their new reality. But there was also laughter, shared stories, and the gradual forging of a bond that felt both fresh and familiar. Edward helped Maya move out of her tiny apartment and into a comfortable condo he owned downtown. At first, she had resisted, but Edward had been persistent. I've missed 26 birthdays, 26 Christmases, he argued. Let me do this one thing for you. Gradually, Maya allowed herself to accept his generosity, not just the material comforts, but the emotional support, the unwavering belief in her abilities, the pride with which he introduced her to colleagues and friends. This is my daughter Maya, he would say, his voice warm with affection. She quit her job at the coffee shop but kept working at the law firm, determined to maintain her independence even as she adjusted to her new circumstances. Edward respected her decision, though he insisted on setting up a trust fund in her name. It's not about making you dependent, he explained. It's about giving you options. Use it for education, for travel, for starting your own business someday, or don't use it at all. The choice is yours. As for Daniel, he had tried repeatedly to contact her in the days after the wedding that wasn't. Maya had ignored his calls, texts, and the elaborate flower arrangements that arrived at her door. She needed time to heal, to process not just the rejection but the revelation about her father. It was nearly 3 months after the failed wedding when she ran into Daniel at a charity gala Edward had invited her to attend. She had been standing near the bar, sipping a glass of champagne and half listening to Edward's conversation with a business associate, when she felt a familiar presence at her side. Maya, Daniel said softly, you look beautiful. She turned to face him, surprised by her own calm. He looked the same, yet somehow diminished, his confident posture replaced by a hesitant stance, his eyes shadowed with what looked like regret. Daniel, she acknowledged with a slight nod. I didn't expect to see you here. My father's company is one of the sponsors, he explained, his gaze dropping to the floor before meeting her eyes again. Part of her wanted to refuse, to walk away without giving him the satisfaction of closure, but another part The part that had loved him for 2 years needed to hear what he had to say. 5 minutes, she agreed, placing her champagne glass on a nearby table, outside on the terrace. The October night was cool, the terrace illuminated by strings of soft white lights that gave the garden below an ethereal glow. Maya wrapped her arms around herself, grateful for the shawl that matched her midnight blue evening gown, another gift from Edward, who had insisted on taking her shopping for the event. "I've been trying to reach you," Daniel began, standing a respectful distance away. "I wanted to apologize." "For which part?" Maya asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "For letting your parents take over our wedding? For not standing up for me? Or for letting your father tell me I wasn't good enough while you hid inside the church?" Daniel winced. "For all of it. I was a coward, Maya. I've always been a coward when it comes to my parents. They've had this plan for my life since before I was born, the right schools, the right career, the right wife. And I've always followed it because it was easier than fighting." "That's not an excuse," Maya said quietly. "No, it's not," Daniel agreed. "It's an explanation, not a justification. When I met you, I fell in love with your spirit, your determination, your kindness. All the things that made you different from the women my parents wanted me to date. But then I tried to change those very things to make you fit their mold." He took a step closer, his eyes pleading. "I've done a lot of thinking these past months. About the kind of man I want to be, the kind of man you deserved." Maya felt a familiar ache in her chest, but it was duller now, more distant. "And what conclusions did you come to?" "That I want to be my own man," Daniel said firmly. "I've left my father's company. I'm starting my own investment firm, focusing on supporting small businesses in underserved communities." Maya raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "That's not what I expected." Daniel smiled ruefully. "Me neither. But it feels right. For the first time in my life, I'm making choices because they matter to me, not because they check a box on my parents' list of expectations." He reached for her hand, and she allowed the brief contact before gently pulling away. "I miss you, Maya, every day. I know I don't deserve another chance, but if there's any part of you that still cares for me, I'd like to try again, starting over, on equal footing. No parents, no expectations, just us." Maya looked into his eyes, searching for the man she had fallen in love with. He was there, but somehow clearer now, more defined, as if he had finally stepped out of his parents' shadow and into his own light. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine reconciliation, a new beginning. But then she thought of the past 3 months, of the strength she had found in herself, of the relationship she was building with her father. "I can't, Daniel," she said gently. "Not because I don't believe you've changed, or because I don't care for you. I do. But these months apart have shown me that I need to focus on myself right now, on building the life I want, not the one someone else envisions for me." Daniel nodded, accepting her decision with a grace that the old Daniel might not have managed. "I understand. But Maya, I hope someday, when you're ready, you might consider letting me back into your life, even just as a friend." Maya smiled, a genuine smile that held no bitterness. "Maybe someday," she agreed, "but not yet." As they walked back inside, Maya caught sight of Edward watching them from across the room, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. She gave him a reassuring smile, and he visibly relaxed, raising his glass to her in a small toast. A year passed, filled with changes both large and small. Maya used part of her trust fund to return to school, pursuing the degree in social work she had always wanted but couldn't afford. She moved out of Edward's condo into an apartment of her own, smaller but still comfortable, wanting to maintain her independence while accepting his support. Edward, for his part, proved to be a thoughtful and generous father, giving her space when she needed it but always available with advice, encouragement, or simply a willing ear. He introduced her to his world gradually, never pushing but always including her in family events and important occasions. "I'm thinking of retiring next year," he told her one evening, as they shared dinner at his penthouse apartment, "turning the day-to-day operations of the company over to someone younger." Maya looked up from her plate, surprised. "Really? But you love your work." Edward smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she had come to treasure. "I do, but I love being your father more. I've missed so much of your life already." "I don't want to miss any more because I'm too busy with meetings and conference calls." Maya felt a rush of affection for this man who had come into her life so unexpectedly and changed it so profoundly. "What will you do instead?" "Travel, maybe. There are so many places I've been for business but never really seen." He took a sip of his wine, studying her over the rim of his glass. "I was hoping you might join me for some of it. When your studies allow, of course." "I'd like that," Maya said warmly. Edward cleared his throat, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you. A proposition. Of sorts." Maya raised an eyebrow. "That sounds serious." "It is," Edward acknowledged. "I've been thinking about the future of Winter's Tech, about succession planning." "And?" Maya prompted when he hesitated. "And I'd like you to consider joining the company. Not right away, but after you finish your degree. There's a foundation we've established to support various charitable initiatives. It could use someone with your compassion and your soon-to-be professional expertise in social work." Maya stared at him, stunned. "You want me to run your foundation? But I don't know anything about corporate philanthropy." "You know about people," Edward countered. "About what they need, how to help them effectively. The rest you can learn." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I'm not asking because you're my daughter, Maya. I'm asking because you're exactly the right person for the role. Your background, your education, your natural empathy, you could do so much good with the resources we have." Maya felt a flicker of excitement at the thought. "Can I think about it?" Edward smiled. "Of course. Take all the time you need." It was on a crisp autumn day, almost exactly 2 years after her non-wedding, that Maya found herself back at the same coffee shop where she had first met Edward. She had maintained a friendship with Dave, the baker, and occasionally stopped by to catch up when her schedule allowed. She was sitting at a small table by the window, enjoying a cappuccino and watching people hurry past on the street, when the bell over the door jingled and a familiar figure walked in. Daniel looked different than the last time she had seen him. His hair was slightly longer, his expensive suit replaced by dark jeans and a casual sweater. But the biggest change was in his demeanor, more relaxed, more authentic somehow, as if he had settled comfortably into his own skin. He didn't notice her at first, busy ordering his coffee at the counter. Maya considered slipping out before he saw her, but found herself staying put, curious rather than anxious about this unexpected encounter. When he turned and saw her, his surprise gave way to a tentative smile. "Maya," he said, approaching her table. "It's good to see you." "You too," she replied, surprised to find she meant it. "How have you been?" "Good," Daniel said. "Busy. The investment firm is taking off. We've been able to fund some really promising small businesses this year." Maya nodded, genuinely pleased for him. "That's wonderful." An awkward silence fell between them, 2 years of unspoken words hanging in the air. Then Daniel gestured to the empty chair across from her. Maya hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Sure." As they talked, cautiously at first and then with growing ease, Maya was struck by how much they had both changed. Daniel spoke about his work with genuine passion, about the families whose businesses he had helped save during the economic downturn, about the community center he was helping to fund in a struggling neighborhood. My parents aren't thrilled with my career change, he admitted with a wry smile. Dad especially. He sees it as a rejection of everything he built. And is it? Maya asked. Daniel considered the question seriously. Not a rejection exactly. Taking the skills he taught me and using them in a way that feels meaningful to me, not just profitable. Maya found herself sharing her own nurture studies, her work with a local youth center, Edward's offer to run the Winters Foundation. You should take it, Daniel said immediately. You'd be amazing at it. You think so? Maya asked, still uncertain despite months of consideration. I know so, Daniel assured her. You've always had this gift for seeing what people need, for meeting them where they are without judgment. That's rare, Maya, especially in the corporate world. Their conversation flowed easily, 2 hours passing before Maya glanced at her watch and realized she was late for a study group. As they stood to leave, Daniel hesitated. I've missed this, he said softly. Talking to you, being with you. Maya felt a flutter in her chest, a familiar warmth she had thought long extinguished. I've missed it too, she admitted. Would you like to have dinner sometime? Daniel asked, his expression hopeful but prepared for rejection. Just as friends, he added quickly. No pressure, no expectations. Maya studied him, this new Daniel who seemed so much more aligned with the man she had fallen in love with years ago. Dinner led to more dinners, to lunches, to long walks through the city as autumn turned to winter, and winter softened into spring. They rebuilt their relationship slowly, cautiously, both acutely aware of the past but increasingly focused on the present and the future. Daniel met Edward properly this time, not as an adversary but as the man who loved Maya. The two men were wary of each other at first, circling like boxers looking for an opening. But gradually, a grudging respect developed between them, born of their shared commitment to Maya's happiness. He's not what I expected, Edward admitted after a particularly successful dinner where the three of them had managed to discuss politics, business ethics, and the best pizza in Boston without a single awkward silence. He seems genuine. He is, Maya assured him. He's found his own path, just like I have. Edward studied her face, noting the soft glow in her cheeks, the light in her eyes. You still love him, he observed. Maya didn't deny it. I do, but it's different now. More equal, more honest. We're both different people than we were 2 years ago. Edward nodded thoughtfully. Just be careful, he advised. Not because I don't trust him, but because I couldn't bear to see you hurt again. Maya reached across the table to squeeze his hand. I know, Dad. I'll be careful. The word Dad still felt new on her tongue, but increasingly natural. Edward's eyes always lit up when she used it, as if each time was a small miracle he hadn't dared to hope for. On a warm evening in late May, Daniel took Maya to the Boston Public Garden, where they had gone on their first date years earlier. The garden was in full bloom, the air scented with flowers, the swan boats gliding peacefully across the lagoon. They walked hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in the rhythm they had established over the past few months. When they reached the small bridge over the water, Daniel stopped, turning to face her. Maya, he began, his voice serious but warm. The last time I tried to do this, I got it all wrong. I was more concerned with appearances than with what really mattered. I let other people's expectations dictate one of the most important decisions of my life. Maya felt her heart begin to race as he took both her hands in his. I'm not making that mistake again, Daniel continued. I love you, your strength, your kindness, your unwavering sense of who you are and what matters to you. I love the way you've built a relationship with your father, the passion you bring to your work with young people, the person you've become while I was busy figuring out who I wanted to be." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. But instead of dropping to one knee as he had the first time he proposed, he simply held the box in his palm, offering it to her as an equal. "I'm not asking you to fit into my world this time," he said softly. "I'm asking if we can build a world together that honors both our dreams, both our values, one that we create for ourselves, not to please anyone else." He opened the box to reveal a ring, not the ostentatious diamond he had given her before, but a delicate band with a small sapphire that matched the pendant she still wore, surrounded by tiny, twinkling diamonds. "I had it made to match your necklace," Daniel explained. "I wanted it to honor your connection to your father, to your mother's memory, to be a symbol of your history as well as our future." Tears filled Maya's eyes as she looked at the ring, so perfectly aligned with who she was and what mattered to her. "How did you know?" she whispered. Daniel smiled. "I asked Edward for his blessing. We spent an afternoon looking at stones together. He told me about your mother, about the significance of the sapphire." Maya felt a rush of love for both these men who had found their way back to her heart, each in their own way. "And what did my father say?" she asked, already guessing the answer from the ring in Daniel's hand. "He said it was your choice," Daniel replied, "but that if I ever hurt you again, he would personally ensure that my business mysteriously lost all its investors overnight." Maya laughed through her tears. "That sounds like him." "So," Daniel said, his own eyes suspiciously bright, "Maya Evans, will you marry me? For real this time, no disappearing acts, no overbearing parents. Just us and whatever family we choose to include." Maya took a deep breath, thinking of the journey that had brought her to this moment, the pain of rejection, the joy of finding her father, the growth that had come from standing on her own. And now, the chance to move forward with a man who had done his own growing, who saw her clearly and loved her completely. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will." The wedding was held the following spring, in the garden of Edward's country house outside the city. It was everything Maya had originally wanted: simple, intimate, with only their closest friends and family in attendance. She wore a flowing dress of ivory silk, her dark hair crowned with a wreath of wildflowers that she and her bridesmaids had gathered that morning. Around her neck hung the sapphire pendant, her mother's something blue, a connection to the past as she stepped into her future. Daniel waited for her beneath an arch of climbing roses, his face lighting up as she walked toward him on Edward's arm. There were no whispers this time, no judgmental glances, only smiles and a few happy tears from those who had witnessed their journey. When they reached the altar, Edward kissed Maya's cheek before placing her hand in Daniel's. "Be happy," he whispered, "both of you." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, their vows written by them rather than recited from tradition. They spoke of respect and partnership, of weathering storms together, of building a life that reflected their shared values while honoring their individual dreams. At the reception, held on the lawn as the sun began to set, Edward stood to offer a toast. He looked distinguished in his tailored suit, his silver hair catching the golden light, his eyes fixed on his daughter with unmistakable pride. "When I walked into that coffee shop 3 years ago," he began, "I was a man who had spent decades regretting the choice I made as a young man, the choice to let pride and family expectations come before love. I had no idea that fate was about to give me a second chance, not just to find my daughter, but to see her forge her own path with more courage than I ever had." He turned to Daniel, his expression serious but not unkind. "You and I didn't get off to the best start, son. But I've watched you become the kind of man who deserves Maya's love, who values her strength rather than being threatened by it, who supports her dreams rather than trying to reshape them." Finally, he raised his glass to the couple, To Maya and Daniel, may you always remember that love isn't about fitting someone into a predetermined mold. It's about growing together, supporting each other, and building something new and beautiful from the best parts of who you both are. As the guests echoed the toast, Daniel leaned close to whisper in Maya's ear, "No regrets? About not having the big fancy wedding?" Maya looked around at the intimate gathering, at Edward chatting with her bridesmaids, at Daniel's parents who had eventually come around after seeing their son's determination, talking politely with her former boss from the coffee shop, at the simple but elegant decorations, and the heartfelt celebration that reflected who they truly were. "Not a single one," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "This is exactly the wedding I always wanted, with exactly the right people." Later, as they danced under string lights that mirrored the stars appearing in the twilight sky, Maya caught sight of Edward watching them from the edge of the dance floor. He raised his glass in a private toast, his smile both joyful and a little bittersweet. Maya knew he was thinking of her mother, of the love they had shared and lost, of the parallel paths their lives had taken. But there was peace in his expression too, a sense of completion that came from finding her after so many years of searching. As Daniel twirled her around the floor, Maya felt a profound gratitude wash over her, for the twists and turns that had led her here, even the painful ones, for the father who had found his way back to her, for the man who had found the courage to become his best self, not for her, but alongside her. 3 years ago, she had stood in a church feeling inadequate, rejected for being too poor to join a family that valued status above happiness. Today, she was exactly where she belonged, rich in love, in purpose, in the knowledge of her own worth that no one could ever take away again. As the night deepened and stars filled the sky above the garden, Maya and Daniel slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand toward their future, not a future dictated by others' expectations, but one they would build together, day by day, choice by choice, with the wisdom they had both earned through loss and love, and finding their way back to each other.